How far back do we go to start to discuss this topic? Do we begin with the rulers of ancient city-states in the Fertile Crescent? Do we begin with the structure of nomadic hunter-gatherer communities? Do we begin with the social hierarchy of chimpanzees, our closest living relatives? Do we discuss the now discredited idea of the alpha male wolf, or perhaps more pertinently, the male head of a pride of lions? Across the animal kingdom, social behavior has arisen many times. Many species have found working together rather than as individuals to be beneficial. Some animals have taken this to extremes, such as the eusocial bees and ants, where sterile workers do all the labor for an eternally egg-laying queen. But even in those less formally social animals, the question still inevitably arises: who's in charge?
I despise guessing games.
For the vast majority of human history and prehistory, the answer to that question has boiled down to the guy with the biggest stick. And then once that guy has been in power so long that people have stopped questioning his being there, he typically gets to choose his successor, which more than likely will be one of his kids. Generations pass, and as long as none of Big Stick Guy's descendants prove too stupid or volatile, the social structure around him will find this system preferable to the previous system of hitting each other with sticks until there's one person left with a stick. Stability, even an authoritarian stability, is preferable to constant war. And as even more generations pass, going from Big Stick Guy the 13th to Big Stick Guy the 2011th, eventually the Big Stick Guys get into their heads that this state of affairs is inevitable, even ordained by a higher power. Thus, religion is used to justify hereditary monarchy. Notice I've been saying him. This is acknowledging the historical reality that far and away most kings have been men. Now, to some alien coming to Earth and looking at how human reproduction works as an outside observer, this may seem strange, as prior to DNA testing, paternity was basically impossible to prove, while maternity is pretty damn obvious. Surely a system of hereditary leadership should be matrilineal, passing from mother to child, and that fact has consumed kings throughout the ages, going to great lengths to make sure no other men got busy with their wives.
Oh, I forgot to tell you about my chastity belt. It's an Everlast.
Ahmet.
But why are men in charge in the first place? Well, to be honest, this is still an open question. Archaeological evidence suggests that hunter-gatherer societies were egalitarian, with no sex being elevated above the other. But something about settling down and starting to farm led to patriarchy. There is no one single time this happened. Archaeologists note multiple instances where formerly egalitarian societies shifted to being dominated by men with the invention of agriculture. It's possible this arises from a division of labor along sexual lines, men working out in the fields with crops and livestock, and women remaining in the home cooking and producing textiles. This isolates women while encouraging male-to-male friendships, leading to a sort of divide and conquer that leads to domination by men. And over time this becomes tradition, believed to be inevitable, enforced by religion, the way things have always been and must always be forever. What is notable is that this shift to patriarchy predates class differences. These societies are still egalitarian within a single sex. It is only when these communities grow and become more complex that we start to see hierarchical stratification. Maybe it's Mr. Big Stick wanting Mr. Smaller Stick's sheep. Maybe Mr. Big Stick already has all the sheep and makes everyone else pay tribute to him to get access to the wool. Established families already working a piece of land rent out small parcels of it to newcomers, again in return for tribute. Small differences accumulate over time, resulting in disparities in generational wealth, and eventually, inevitably even, you have peasants and slaves building literal pyramids for kings to rule from. Let's look at a real-world example. King Chucky III of the United Kingdom can trace his lineage all the way back to William the Conqueror. Now, sure, there were a few wars and other hiccups between those two boys, but every time they came to power, each new king or queen, England did manage to get a few girls in.
Oh, look, Senator Keeley there. I think that's a girl.
Then it's been a long time since you've seen one. That's a boy.
Justified their rule not by right of conquest, but descent from a prior king. Even William himself acted upon such a claim, being a cousin of earlier Anglo-Saxon kings. Those kings claimed descent from Alfred the Great, who united the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms against the Danelaw. His ancestors ruled the petty kingdom of Wessex, one of several settled by Germanic tribes who conquered the Britons after the Roman retreat. Those Britons were a blending of the Roman conquerors and the native Celtic peoples, who themselves had migrated to the shores of England centuries before. If you go back far enough, Chucky's ancestors were just schmucks farming in mainland Europe with not even a dream of power in their hearts. And yet today, he gets to sleep in a big castle with his wife because God, according to the church that he technically runs, said so. Now, putting aside for the nonce the divine right of kings or the mandate of heaven, we're almost to the Hunchback video, don't worry. Why did anyone go along with this system? Well, for starters, it was again a pretty simple way to ensure stability. Who's in charge? That guy with the shiny hat and the shiny chair, and after him, his son, and after him, his son, yada yada. No mucking about with succession crises, and given that you're usually king for life, your reign is going to last many years, meaning nice long spans of time without any political realignment. Going from Obama to Trump to Biden, then back to Trump gave me some severe whiplash, I tell you what. It's almost enough to make me want to have just one guy for those 2 decades. Almost. Another perk is that if you know who's going to be in charge next, that guy can be trained for the job. As I mentioned back in the Sword in the Stone video, the liberal arts education began in the form of tutoring the nobility, particularly royal heirs, to ensure they'd have the knowledge and hopefully wisdom to rule intelligently. The goal is for the transfer of power to be as smooth as possible. The king is dead! Long live the king! Good thing the prince we're crowning just spent the past 2 decades learning philosophy and chivalry and how to stab another guy off a horse.
One dummy trying to knock off another dummy with a bit of a stick.
But here we run into the first main issue with this whole caboodle. There is no guarantee at all that the crown prince is going to be any good at the job, tutor or no. What if he's cruel and violent? What if he's bad with money and throws too many extravagant parties? What if he's tactless and offends foreign dignitaries? What if he has mental health issues or just never paid attention to his tutor and has no idea what he's doing? What if dad died when he was 2 years old? Hereditary monarchies have no built-in system to deal with a bad king beyond waiting him out or killing him. And this isn't a fear-mongering hypothetical either. Rebellions happened constantly. Britain alone has had numerous succession crises and multiple revolts, not even including the struggles for independence of its former colonies. And almost all of those revolts have the same cause. This king sucks. We want a better one.
The king is a tyrant, whether we say so or not. We might as well say so.
The often violent succession of one king by another was a very common topic for William Shakespeare, which makes sense given that he was an artist patronized by the nobility. Of course they'd want him to write about kings and shit. And perhaps the most well-known of these is Hamlet. The eponymous Prince of Denmark learns from his dead dad that his uncle committed fratricide, and the ghost exhorts his still living son to avenge his murder. He does so, eventually, after killing several other people, including himself. A classic tale of the senselessness of revenge and the cycle of violence. It also has had an astounding impact on the English language. The phrases, "Neither a borrower nor a lender be," "To thine own self be true," "The lady doth protest too much," "Brevity is the soul of wit," and "Hoist with his own petard," all come from this play, as do the concepts of the mind's eye, the method in the madness, woe is me, and willy-nilly. Not to mention the single most famous monologue in perhaps all theater, "To be or not to be."
You have not experienced Shakespeare until you have read him in the original Klingon.
But what you'll find throughout Shakespeare, and honestly most literature written in or set in medieval Europe, is there is never any condemnation of the monarchical or feudal system itself. Bad kings may be bad, but it's just the one guy. As soon as we get a better king, everything will be fine again. And never mind that we seem to keep having bad kings on a regular basis. It's starting to mess with this whole stability thing that was the entire point of this scheme to begin with. And yet, despite that, or perhaps because of it, we have been enamored with royalty, even when we hail from democracies. Millions of Americans tune into Britain's royal weddings and coronations, viewing the pageantry and excessive displays of wealth as a sort of entertainment. Because quite a few modern democracies have, for some reason, held on to vestigial monarchies, their kings supposedly figureheads that no longer have any say in policy, but are still, for some reason, very necessary. Monarchy apologists will argue that a king or queen gives the people a symbol to rally behind, again a marker of stability, that while Congress or Parliament may change, the royal family is constant. And perhaps no American institution has embraced this idea of royalty more than Disney. From his very first feature film, Walt consistently adapted stories of princes and princesses. This isn't entirely his fault. As I've discussed previously, fairy tales are about the nobility because in the time they were written, the nobility led more interesting lives and thus would have had more interesting stories told about them. But after almost 60 years, it does start to feel like a deliberate choice. Of the Disney Animation Studios' first 32 films, just under half of them center royalty or at least nobility as either heroes or villains. And that ramped up in the 90s. Of the 10 films of the Disney Renaissance, 5 of them have a female main character now part of the Disney Princess lineup. And in addition, we have the Disney film perhaps most concerned with monarchy, The Lion King. Now, Disney has at times touted The Lion King as its very first original story, but this is patently untrue. Firstly, because The Lady and the Tramp did that almost 4 decades prior. Do not believe the credits. The story was created by Joe Grant. And secondly, because The Lion King was absolutely based on prior works.
Before I came aboard, it was described as Bambi in Africa with Hamlet thrown in, so Bamblet.
That's right, The Lion King is in some ways the very first Disney remake. A young animal is born to a noble animal family, comes of age while losing a parent, and ends the film acceding to the animal throne, all set to some of the company's most stunning animation and memorable music. Sound familiar?
All this has happened before, and it will all happen again.
But this time around, Disney didn't want to involve man at all because they didn't want the NRA to get pissy at them again for demonizing hunters. But if you take man out of Bambi, you lose basically any and all conflict, because in case you haven't watched my Bambi video, the story is a Holocaust allegory where man represents the Nazis and the other anti-Semites that preceded them. If you read the original book, it is not subtle. So without all of that, the Lion movie needed stakes and a plot, and that's where Shakespeare comes in.
There were days when we went more down the Hamlet path. There were moments when we had lines of Shakespeare into the movie. Scar throwing Mufasa into the stampede, saying "Good night, sweet prince," and things like that. And it became too kind of self-conscious.
Hamlet is a decent fit as it's specifically about the succession of kings, and you've got the supernatural element with the ghost. But Disney was never gonna have the film end in a mass murder-suicide, so all that got smoothed over into a happy ending. We will be talking about the particular consequences of that choice later. I'm pretty sure that's all the major influences of this movie. I'm certain there are absolutely no other properties worth mentioning here. What's that? Oh, some of you seem to already be typing up comments. Well, I guess I have to talk about the white lion in the room. Kimba, 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 Kimba. Kimba, the White Lion, is an anime from the 60s based on a manga from the 50s, and it is very of both of those decades. At the start of the story, Kimba's parents die, and later the cub is inspired by a vision of a dead parent floating in the sky, and he accumulates animal friends like a mandrill and a bird, and he's challenged by a bad lion with a scar on his face, and yeah, you can see why a lot of people think Disney ripped off this anime. But despite those similarities, the actual narrative of Kimba is very different from The Lion King. Being an episodic anime, it's mostly just Kimba helping solve the problem of the week in self-contained shorts, but the through line is trying to civilize the wild beasts of Africa. Like I said, it's very of the 50s and 60s. This little shit at one point walks on 2 legs and wears pants. It's bizarre. Kimba and pals also constantly interact with humans as part of their quest to become more like humans. Also, Kimba is the English localization. His name in the original Japanese is Leo, because he's a lion. So where did Kimba come from? Well, originally the localizers were going to call him Simba, because that's Swahili for lion. There are in fact quite a few actual meat space lions called Simba for this very reason. And because it is just a common noun in Swahili, the localizers changed the initial consonant for fears that the name Simba couldn't actually be trademarked. And yeah, while Disney's Simba has animal buddies similar to Kimba's, that's because they're in Africa. They are African animals. And they don't really share personalities with the Kimba characters. They are based off of characters from Hamlet. Scar is Claudius, Sarabi is Gertrude, Nala is Ophelia, Zazu is Polonius, Rafiki is Horatio, and Timon and Pumbaa are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
The Shakespearean angle, of course, the Hamlet angle that gets talked about
Now what's hilarious is that, if anything, Tezuka, the studio that animated Kimba, ripped off The Lion King when they made a feature film that released in 1997 called Jungle Emperor Leo. While The Lion King makes visual homages to Tezuka's anime from the 60s, Jungle Emperor Leo straight up replicates shots from Disney's film, including a piece of concept art. The film's plot does differ significantly, once again focusing on interactions with humans, but these jarring visual similarities are largely what have caused the internet to believe that Disney copied Tezuka. This whole debacle has been very thoroughly covered by YMS, and there's no way in hell I am going to also spend a combined 3 hours on this issue when he already has. Go watch his videos if you care.
I'm just trying to lion the mood. Lion the mood.
The film that would eventually become The Lion King was in development basically since Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg took over the company. Wait, wasn't there a third guy? Yeah, Frank Wells. He was the president of Disney, and yet I haven't talked about him since the Black Cauldron video. What exactly has he been doing? According to his rather short Wikipedia article, he was climbing mountains. Disney's own website just says he focused on all aspects of the company. That's not what focus means! That is the exact opposite of focus! Whatever, I'm sure he won't be relevant at all later. There are competing stories for how the idea for this movie was incepted. Jeffrey Katzenberg has claimed that elements of his own life informed the narrative, which I'm sure also will not be relevant later. Simba seems to have been the earliest character to be named that actually made it to the finish line, and various drafts of the story added and removed ancillary critters in his orbit. At one point, the movie was titled King of the Jungle, which lasted until someone in production decided to check something and discovered that lions do not live in the jungle, they live in the savannah.
You know, my whole approach is always, I never do any research, I just rely on my imagination.
We're gonna get to the music in a minute. Wait your turn. How does this guy have multiple Oscars? At any rate, the production started to finally take form under director George Scribner, who had just directed Oliver and Company, producer Thomas Schumacher, who had just produced The Rescuers Down Under, and screenwriter Linda Wolverton, who had just written Beauty and the Beast. Their idea was to make the film essentially an animated documentary, showcasing the landscapes and animals of Africa without any Broadway-style musical numbers. Well, Tim Rice, who had just finished writing half the lyrics for Aladdin, R.I.P. Howard Ashman, suggested that they add Broadway-style musical numbers, and wouldn't you know it, Alan Menken was busy working on Pocahontas. So what if instead we got fucking Elton John? Wildly enough, Elton John was not only free, but interested, and him and Tim Rice got busy writing songs. At this point, George Scribner noped out, being completely uninterested in making another musical, and he was replaced by Rob Minkoff and Roger Allers, who had storyboarded Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin. Unlike Aladdin, the production team actually did a research trip to Africa, getting lots of views of the landscape and lots of close-up time with various African animals, particularly lions. Of course, someone had to animate those lions, but most of the big names I've discussed so far were working on Pocahontas. It was thought at the time that this biopic about an indigenous woman would be far more prestigious and awards-winning than the silly lion picture, and the studio had surprisingly little faith in this movie. Oh, the irony. The biggest names you'll find on The Lion King are Mark Henn drawing young Simba, James Baxter drawing Rafiki, and Andreas Deja supervising the animation of Scar.
Life's not fair, is it?
Because the big hitters like Glenn Keane were working on next time's movie, it gave more junior animators an opportunity to strut their stuff, and up strutted Ruben Aquino to tackle adult Simba. He had been animating with Disney since The Black Cauldron, apart from a brief side gig to, am I reading this correctly, design the alien from Mac and Me? At any rate, you have him to thank for Maurice, Ursula, and Simba, as well as others we will get to in due time. In the end, this film got 3 credited screenwriters, adding Irene Mecchi and Jonathan Roberts to the team. On top of that, a full 17 people contributed to the story, including Bernie Mattinson, Gary Trousdale, Chris Sanders, and again, Joe Ranft, who would have had to hop between this film and Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah, this is a considerably more collaborative process than ordinary writing, ordinary screenwriting. fighting.
While many at the company were more interested in their upcoming prestige biopic, that left the team working on The Lion King feeling kind of like an underdog, full of gumption and doing their best regardless, and it seems like they had a pretty good creative working environment.
I remember the last thing that a lot of people said, including myself, right before it released, this is either going to be huge or it's not going to work at all.
The opening of the film was perhaps the single most iconic piece of animation ever produced. The guy singing is Lebo M, a South African choral director that Hans Zimmer invited to the project. Zimmer originally wanted to use traditional African instruments, but it turns out that mostly means drums, and much like James Horner would later do for Avatar, he pivoted to a more conventional score in the Western classical tradition. Also, fun fact, the lyrics Lebo M is singing, which he apparently improvised on the day of recording, is just, "Hey, it's a lion!" over and over, which I think is hilarious. The imagery of this scene is where the film most pays homage to the old Kimba anime, and is also the sequence most ripped off by the later Kimba movie. After Lebo M's Zulu lyrics fade away, we hear Carmen Twilly's rich contralto. This song, Circle of Life, introduces that concept which is so central to this film's messaging and themes. Like the sun rising and setting, our lives are short and pass quickly, succeeded by others in turn. But also, like the sun, we can shine brightly during our time on this planet. This is just a very big movie, visually depicting sprawling, primeval landscapes and grappling with important and foundational philosophical concepts. But while the sequence begins almost in the abstract, focusing on the every animal, the silent creatures awakening as the sun rises and going about their day, we soon close in on the specific of an anthropomorphized animal monarchy. In stark defiance of zoological reality, we see vast throngs of prey animals gathered to gaze up adoringly at and supplicate themselves before the predators that hunt, kill, and eat them.
Lion King is allegory. I think all good animation at its best is allegory for us as human beings.
An allegory of what, I wonder?
Life's not fair, is it?
Visually, it is iconic, but if you think about what's actually going on in this sequence, it starts to rankle in your brain. At first, there's the layer of fantastical pageantry, Rafiki lifting up baby Simba, rotating flawlessly under James Baxter's divine pencil. Then you think of the subsurface ideas, the great circle of life, son succeeding father, king succeeding king. Then you start clawing at the bottom of the iceberg, screaming, "Why are the lions in charge?"
When we die, our bodies become the grass, and the antelope eat the grass.
Sure, but you don't violently die with the predator's bicuspids lodged into your jugular. Antelopes lining up to pay homage to lions is like humans lining up to pay homage to vampires, which, now that I'm thinking about it, is actually a very apt metaphor for monarchy, a small elite of rich parasites who have somehow convinced their subjects that getting eaten by them is somehow good, actually, and also ordained by God, so keep fattening yourselves up, please and thank you.
Life's not fair, is it?
Except, as we'll see, this is not the message the filmmakers were going for. They were being earnest and sincere about the idea that lions deserve to be in charge. As you may already be able to tell, this fact makes me feral.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
At least our characters are engaging. Our villain for the evening is Scar, voiced deliciously by Jeremy Irons, who brings an 11 to every role regardless.
Let their blood rain from the sky!
He is the younger brother of Mufasa, who is voiced by the majestic James Earl Jones.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take it away!
While most of the names in this movie come from Swahili, Mufasa doesn't. It has been claimed to mean king in the Manazoto language, but that language does not exist. The Swahili for king is Mfalme, so probably someone on the story team decided that was too hard for American children to pronounce and fiddled with the phonetics. Now surely Scar is not this guy's birth name, right? Well, in subsequent media, Disney has decided that he was originally named Taka, which is Swahili for garbage. Gee, I wonder why he wants to kill his brother.
There's one in every family, sir.
2 in mine, actually.
Everyone say hello to Rowan Atkinson, who begins the never-ending parade of comic relief side characters in this movie. At least the film looks good, constantly showing sweeping vistas and plenty of computerized multi-plane action for our animated animals to romp across or stand majestically atop of.
Everything the light touches is our kingdom.
All the memes around, what about that shadowy place, are hilarious, but this also introduces our next problematic topic, enforced segregation! The hyenas are confined to a literal ghetto full of corpses and trash.
I hate hyenas.
This is the problem with using animals as stand-ins for human beings. Inevitably, the audience is going to start thinking of different species of animals as correlating to different races of humans. This is an even bigger issue in Zootopia, where it explicitly wants to discuss racism via animals, but it still raises questions about world building here. The hyenas, as we soon see, are able to talk and think and have rich inner lives.
What you call an open stay?
Yet the movie tells us they're bad.
Then you can chase those slobbering, mangy, stupid poachers from dawn until dusk.
It doesn't really tell us why they're bad, at least in a way that makes them substantively different from lions. Lions and hyenas are both predators, and lions scavenge about as much as hyenas do. So what's the problem? That they look different?
Which means they must be evil.
I think I see how it is. The lions are in charge and they don't want any competition, so they push out propaganda that hyenas are not to be trusted and exile them to live in
That shadowy place.
And it's not just a case of rival kingdoms. Hyenas are the only species depicted living in the elephant graveyard. All the antelopes and elephants and whatnot live in the Pride Lands governed by the lions. And there aren't different factions of hyenas. There are no good hyenas living peacefully in the Pride Lands. They all live in Trash Land. The movie is thus suggesting that the hyenas are in some way ontologically evil, like the orcs in the Lord of the Rings. Which, if we are accepting that this is a metaphor for human ethnic groups, is suggesting that there are some human races that are ontologically evil. And which races might those be? Well, while most of the quote-unquote good guys are voiced by white actors, the two hyenas with actual speaking roles are voiced by actors of color, Whoopi Goldberg and Cheech Marin. Are you seeing the problem yet? What's also interesting is that while the movie accurately depicts that female lions do all the hunting while the dominant male lazes around all day, hyena packs in real life are matriarchal. Female hyenas are larger and more muscular than male hyenas who behave submissively toward their dommy mommies. Female hyenas also have enlarged clitorises that are about as big as the male's penis, which requires that the males practice how the hell to slip their dick in. Apparently it takes them months to figure it out. Now I don't know if Disney's research trip extended to that level of zoological trivia, but it is fascinating that the movie presents the patriarchal predators as noble and deserving to rule, and the matriarchal predators as base and unfit for leadership. Okay, let's talk positives. Just Can't Wait to Be King is a fun song.
I'm gonna be a mighty king, so enemies beware.
It's very colorful and ever so slightly surreal, design choices made by Chris Sanders, who would later write and direct Lilo and Stitch. This song is actually a key part of one of the movie's themes, that of responsibility. I have my issues with this film, but it is very competently constructed. Simba starts off chafing under the authority of his parents and viewing accession to the throne as a chance at freedom.
And with an attitude like that, I'm afraid you're shaping up to be a pretty pathetic king indeed.
Man, Zazu has all the best lines in this film, and he's right, which is interesting because he is the biggest traditionalist in this movie, constantly nattering on about decorum and how Nala and Simba are betrothed, which is nutty because those two are absolutely half siblings. We all know how lion prides work. Ain't no way Mufasa was letting any other guys get their dick wet in his harem. But despite this, Zazu is also intensely critical, with very strong opinions on what being a king entails.
It's Mr. Banana Beat to you, fuzzy.
Honestly, his bitching at Simba being a ne'er-do-well is one of the movie's strongest arguments against Hereditary Monarchy. Why should this little shit be king? He's leading an extravagant musical number about how he's going to be a tyrant who never listens to anyone else.
Not yet.
And he needs to start at this carefree outlook in order for his character arc to work. Also, side note, growing up I had a jigsaw puzzle of the stack of animals from this song, and I would always put it together when I was sick for some reason. Good times. Mufasa is also just legitimately a good dad. When Simba disobeys him and sneaks Nala into the elephant graveyard, Mufasa doesn't punish his son. He has a very frank and and open discussion with him. This is what good parenting looks like. It's okay to be angry as a parent, but it's not okay to let that anger fuel abuse in the guise of discipline. If your kid fucks up, you make them understand why what they did was wrong and teach them to do better next time. That is your job as a parent. This also ties back into the theme of cycles and succession, as we are shown that Simba quite literally has big paws to fill. Honestly, the whole first act of this film is a masterpiece of storytelling. If you can turn off the cynical part of your brain objecting to the implications of its world building, the character interactions are very believable, impeccably voice acted, and exquisitely animated. There's also quite a lot of well-done humor.
Man, I hate dangling.
Cheech Marin, you give me life. Of course, Scar is less amused.
I'm surrounded by idiots.
This leads directly into Be Prepared, a classic villain song, and yes, I know all the words. Why would you even ask?
Be prepared for sensational news.
And if you've ever wondered why his singing changes ever so slightly during the last verse, that's because Jeremy Irons blew out his voice and Jim Cummings had to sub in, and he does a decent job matching him. Something I find interesting is how the Lion King ends up differing from Hamlet. In the play, Hamlet suspects but has no proof that his uncle killed his father. Claudius is all smiles and seems genuinely concerned about his nephew's well-being. You spend much of this tragedy thinking that maybe Hamlet has gone mad, and that Claudius is innocent, especially since no one else seems particularly bummed about Hamlet Sr. dying. It's only in the very last scene, as Claudius dies, that his co-conspirators confirm he did it. In contrast, Scar spends the first half of this movie openly plotting how to off Mufasa, and is made very clearly villainous both visually and in his vocal performance.
Simba, it's to die for.
And yet his conniving is so successful that he manages to convince Simba that he caused his own father's death. We see Scar whispering to Simba, metaphorically pouring poison into his nephew's ear. The stampede itself, like so much of this film, is iconic, and yet another showcase of CGI. Ruben Aquino hand-drew a run cycle for a wildebeest, and that was then turned into a 3D wireframe.
A lot of people think, oh, computer animation, everyone's doing it, and the whole movie is done that way. Almost everything we do is still drawn by hand.
The CG animators then programmed a simulation for the individual wildebeests to avoid clipping through each other, and then the finished beasts were colored in with caps like the hand-drawn elements in the scene. The result is astonishing, making the audience feel as if this horde might be able to race out of the screen and trample them. And of course it ends with one of the most chilling lines ever uttered in the history of film.
Long live the king.
In Bambi, we never actually see his mother die. We simply hear the gunshot as the young fawn flees, and then she is never seen again. Bambi must be comforted by a father that he had never before interacted with. In The Lion King, Simba is crushingly left to find his father's corpse, and before he has time to properly grieve, in strolls Scar.
But the king is dead, and if it weren't for you, he'd still be alive.
This is true. Before Simba was born, Scar was heir to the throne. The cub's existence denies Scar a chance at power, and that is what motivates him to take more drastic measures. Now, yes, this is kind of victim blaming, but this is a direct consequence of hereditary monarchy. If the lions lived in a democracy, Scar would have had no motivation to kill his nephew. It is only because leadership among them is determined by primogeniture that he is driven to murder. A man is killed not out of hatred or anger, but because doing so is technically, within this system, a legitimate means of acquiring power. In an absolute monarchy, the king does not have to follow the law, and if you kill the previous king, that usually makes you the new king. Now, some of you may argue that this threat of assassination encourages kings to rule justly and wisely, so that they're less likely to get stabbed in the back. But to a jilted former heir, it doesn't matter how well the current ruler rules, because they're not the current ruler, and they want to be. And in this system, they can't just wait 4 years and oppose them in an election. They have to wait until this fucker dies. So they are in fact incentivized to speed up that process. Hereditary monarchy inherently encourages murder. And now Scar has to finish what he started, and as he sends his hench hyenas to do his dirty work, we hear a familiar melody. I told you, the Dies Irae is fucking everywhere. Now, while Simba does manage to escape, his absence does make Scar, in the eyes of the law, the new king. And this, to me, is the bigger problem with Monarchy. Why do the lionesses go along with this? They know Scar's an awful motherfucker. They should probably be openly wondering if Scar shoved Mufasa off a cliff. When Scar trots up saying he's king now, the lionesses should have gone, no thanks, we've got this, and sent him back off to Trashland with his hyenas. But with Mufasa and Simba dead, primogeniture dictates that Scar is king, and the lionesses do not contest this. But now we move into the second half of the film, which, while I will not go so far as to say there's a dip in quality, it definitely becomes more uneven.
The trouble I've seen.
First, we get yet more comic relief side characters as Timon and Pumbaa, voiced by Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabello, rescue Simba from his blues.
I'd say brownish gold.
Now, I love me some Nathan Lane. The Birdcage is one of my favorite movies.
Try more gum, Albert.
But he is just not given great material to work with here. There are way too many food chain jokes.
Lie down before you hurt yourself.
And how do the meerkat and the warthog cheer up the lion cub? Why, with only the most infectious cognito hazard Disney has ever devised.
Hakuna Matata.
Meaning no worries in Swahili, which Disney tried to trademark, by the way. Man, corporate Disney is just the fucking worst. This song was everywhere in the 90s. I remember, I was there. It is the most insidious earworm to ever come from the company, apart from perhaps It's a Small World.
No, anything but that.
Yes, it is a fun song, but I don't think it really deserved to be as widespread as it ended up being.
Pumbaa, not in front of the kids.
Oh, sorry.
Also, there is no way in hell that a fucking lion grew to adulthood on a diet of bugs. Pull the other one it hath bells on. What is real is that after their conversation about what stars are, Simba flops down and the dandelion fluff makes the letters SFX, for special effects, because that was the department that did this animation. However, it looks very close to SEX, and once Disney Corporate noticed this, it got edited out of subsequent home video releases.
It is time.
Rafiki magically learns that Simba is alive. It's carried on the wind somehow. Pretty sure that was Pocahontas' shtick.
Can you paint with all the colors of the wind?
Next video, focus. Okay, this is the opposite of focusing, but while we're here, Disney never got the rights to The Lion Sleeps Tonight. Written in 1939 by Solomon Linda, a South African singer, his family ended up suing Disney for using his song without permission. See, when I do shit like that, YouTube just turns on revenue sharing. When Disney does it, they are stealing! They are making money off of copyrighted works that they did not have license to use, which is ironic given how pissy they get about copyright themselves.
She's gonna eat me!
Okay, the circle of life makes no fucking sense. In the first half of the film, you kinda go along with it, mostly because there are no speaking roles for the prey animals. But now we have a talking pig, and Nala's hungry for some pork! Can you imagine if we just had cannibals running around eating people, and those cannibals were all CEOs and presidents and Instagram influencers, and when everyone else rightfully goes, hey, can you stop eating us? They all just shrug and say, circle of life, bitch! This is the issue when you anthropomorphize both ends of the predator-prey relationship. Watership Down gets away with it because it only anthropomorphizes one side of it.
Whenever they catch you, they will kill you.
But The Lion King not only decides to have speaking prey and predators, but also, for whatever fucking reason, decides to include a scene where one of those speaking predators actively hunts one of those speaking prey, and the predator is not a villain. And then afterwards, the prey is expected to be friends with the predator that just tried to eat them!
Did I miss something?
This movie has no idea what it actually wants to say about nature and food chains and how they relate to human societies, and it ends up just being confused and weird. The only reason it sort of halfway gets away with it is because it's shrouded in mysticism, which we'll get to in a sec. First, we have to talk about adult Simba's voice actor, Matthew Broderick. Gee, I wonder what he was doing on August 5th, 1987, just a few years before he was hired for this part. Go on, go look up what he did. I'll wait. Pause this and go to Wikipedia. Y'all caught up now? Y'all catch how he never properly apologized for it and faced no jail time? Anyway, Disney really wanted this white boy who killed 2 people to voice a lion that fucks on screen.
I can see what's happening.
We can all see what's happening. I don't know what Disney thought we'd see happening here, but the furries certainly appreciate it. Anyway, Broderick and Nathan Lane later starred in The Producers together. I'm sure they had a lot to talk about. Surprisingly, sex is not enough to convince Broderick to go back to the Pride Lands. He needs a better reason why.
Because it's your responsibility.
Gotta love when a movie states one of its themes out loud with its mouth holes very often. Broderick's Simba gets all angsty, almost like he recently killed 2 people and was never properly held accountable for his crime, so he races across the savannah where he runs into the best scene in the second half of this film.
The question is, who are you?
An unconvicted manslaughterer. Oh, you meant the lion. An unconvicted manslaughterer. I kid, the lion didn't do anything wrong, nor did Rafiki, who is a higher caliber of comic relief.
Can't cut it out. It'll go right back.
But eventually he does cut it out, and once he gets serious, he leads Simba to reconnect with his dead dad.
He lives in you.
Like in Hamlet, Mufasa exhorts his still-living son to accept his responsibility and avenge his father's death.
You are my son, and the one true king.
Though since this is Disney, James Earl Jones doesn't tell Broderick to murder again. Just, depose your uncle in whatever method is most convenient. We won't say which one.
Change is good.
But of all the messages this movie pushes, this is the one I agree with the most.
But the way I see it, you can either run from it or learn from it.
I do hope Broderick learned to drive on the right side of the road in the United Kingdom, which would in fact be the left side. But seriously, teaching kids to face their mistakes and do better next time is a good lesson. There are a couple movies farther down the line where I will go into more detail about forgiveness and rectifying mistakes. From what I can tell, Broderick does regret what happened and in fact has no memory of the day, claiming to have amnesia as a result of the crash. But the important part is not the regret, the important part is fixing the problem. And apart from a note sent to the family of the women he killed soon after the incident, Broderick does not seem to have done anything to try to make amends. Chat, if you're privy to more information than I've been able to find and know of Broderick actually doing anything substantial, please comment. On a lighter note, who's ready for a little revolution? And I really do mean little. It's just 2 lions, a mandrill, a warthog, and a sassy meerkat.
What do you want me to do? Dress and drag and do the hula?
I'm just accepting the comic relief now, just letting it pass over and through me like the pain in that mystery box from Dune. Anyway, let's check in on Scar.
I am the king. I can do whatever I want.
On April 3rd, 1994, Frank Wells, who seemed to do literally anything other than his job, was skiing in Nevada. He and his friends had taken a helicopter up and down the mountain, and on the way down, it crashed. Frank Wells died in that crash. Apparently he'd been skiing with Clint Eastwood, but Eastwood took a different helicopter. Man, imagine that timeline if they'd shared one. Anyway, Jeffrey Katzenberg had been gunning for Wells's job of president for a while now, and with Frank now dead, he tried to pounce on the position. By this time, Michael Eisner and Roy E. Disney had gotten sick of his shit, and Eisner took the presidency himself. Jeff took that personally, and with tensions high through The Lion King's release in June, Katzenberg was formally let go in August, though he would remain with the company until October. Coming into this series of video essays, I already didn't have the highest regard for Jeffrey Katzenberg. From Lindsay Ellis's videos and everything else I'd heard about the man, let's say I was not a fan. But now halfway through this project, I think I can safely say that Roy E. Disney also rather irritates me. For fuck's sake, Roy, you're the one who hired Jeff in the first place. You're the one who ousted your own cousin for him. Why are you getting so pissy? And Jeff, somewhat understandably, viewed this as a betrayal. He, in his mind, was the one who had brought Disney animation kicking and screaming into prestige once again. He was the one who had shepherded the Disney Renaissance. Was he brash? Was he tactless? Did he ask for a promotion the literal day a coworker died? Absolutely. But without this asshole, I'm probably not here making these video essays right now. Meanwhile, Roy E. would continue to get pissy about who got to play with his dead uncle's toys, and with Jeffy Boy gone, his ire would soon shift to Michael Eisner, as we shall see in a few videos. But at the time, the animators who worked under Katzenberg and were thus most privy to his brashness and assholery probably saw his firing as a just comeuppance.
Life's not fair, is it?
He wouldn't be ousted until after The Lion King's release, but even during production, at least some of them probably saw the writing on the wall, and one can't help but wonder if Andreas Deja and the other animators put a little bit of their soon-to-be former boss in the petulant Scar. The film ends, honestly, kinda lamely with a big punch-up. Gotta love the 90s when being able to do kung fu was considered a joke, though I do like Timon and Pumbaa's little hut-hut. Simba finally faces Scar once more.
You don't deserve to live.
Like those two women in Northern Ireland. Am I being too harsh? I feel like I'm being too harsh. Let me know in the comments if I'm being too hard on Matthew Broderick. At any rate, the lions get into a prolonged literal catfight, including some dumb as hell slow motion. Who thought that this was a good idea? It's just boring. Also, what happened to...
I'm afraid I'm at the shallow end of the gene pool.
Physical fights need to have stakes, physicality. The combatants need to take wounds, bruises, at least get short of breath. This fight is just two stuffed animals slapping each other for 5 minutes. There is no tension. Whatever, Scar admits his guilt, Simba yeets him off a cliff, he gets eaten by his hyenas, hooray. Now, while I can understand that in the time Scar has been king, his policies have led to drought and famine, perhaps he overhunted the herds, causing them to move on, maybe he rerouted a river, who the fuck knows. But it magically starting to rain because Simba is now king is fucking bullshit. This is probably referencing the myth of the Fisher King, a figure from Arthurian legend. He is literally connected to the land itself, and his health, good or otherwise, is reflected in the weather and environment. This is a very medieval idea tied closely to the divine right of kings, justifying monarchy by mystically connecting kingship to the kingdom itself, and it is a bunch of hooey, it's propaganda! And yet it is propaganda that has sunk deeply into the consciousness of basically every culture on this planet, even those without a monarchy. All we need is the right guy in charge, and everything will be fixed. If we elect Gavin Newsom to president, all our problems will be solved and it will rain cheese! This is magical thinking and y'all need to wake up. Governments in the modern world are massive things, built out of hundreds if not thousands of people, even in monarchies. The administering of a modern state requires a bureaucracy large enough to actually do anything. Whether or not the roads get paved does not come down to which guy or girl in a suit is sitting in the fancy chair. It comes down to the construction workers who go out and get it done, and the accountants who make sure they get paid, and the administrators who determine where they should be sent and when. Now, single individuals can make a difference. Compare Carla Brugada's handling of Mexico City and its new utopias with everything Donald Trump has done literally ever, but they matter only because they choose who fills the roles of the bureaucracy. Trump picks who heads each executive department. Trump gets to pick Supreme Court justices. Trump gets to set vague policy agendas, which his underlings then translate into actual actions by the government. None of this happens magically because Trump is sitting in the Oval Office. And if Trump died or resigned and J.D. Vance were suddenly in the Oval Office, not all that much would change because he shares the same policy goals as Trump. If there is a bad king or president or mayor, the land doesn't suddenly shrivel up and die because it sensed evil. The choices those leaders make lead to famines or droughts or other humanitarian disasters. And the ability of those leaders to make impactful choices comes down to the structure of the government they head. A monarchy is supposed to bend to the whim of its monarch. The people have no legal recourse against a monarch's abuses and can only hope that their monarch makes good choices. The entire point of a democracy is for the people to have a say in how they are ruled and how they are administered. And part of that is putting in checks and balances to make sure no one person can fuck things up for everyone else. What we are witnessing in the United States is what happens when an elected leader is given too much leeway, when the checks and balances intended to restrain him are too weak and ineffectual to matter. Trump thinks he is a monarch. That's why he bulldozed the East Wing to build a golden ballroom. He had no legal authority to do this, and this project is not being funded by taxpayers. If we manage to survive this presidency and we want to make sure another Trump can't weasel his way into power, we are going to have to restructure our government. Maybe even rewrite the Constitution to take power away from the president and vest it back into Congress. And Congress itself could use a little restructuring because right now they are showing they can't do anything except agree that a convicted pedophile was bad. Vesting all authority in one person is a recipe for disaster, whether that's Trump or Jeffrey Katzenberg or Scar. It doesn't matter if sometimes you get a good person in power who's able to act effectively, because as soon as a shit stain becomes king, they're going to fuck it all up. The system needs to prevent shit stains from coming into power in the first place. The system needs to be able to keep functioning regardless of who sits in the fancy chair, like vestigial King Chucky with his crown and his castle, technically in charge of an entire country, yet the functioning of that country could not care less if he lives or dies. The king is dead, long live the king. The Lion King was, well, king of the box office in 1994, raking in over $700 million, easily besting Aladdin's record 2 years prior. In that sense, it is the height of the Disney Renaissance, as every other film of the 90s would earn less and less. No other Disney animated film would best this record until Pixar's Finding Nemo in 2003, and no canon entry would surpass it until 2013's Frozen.
Together we made something that not one of us could have done on our own.
But how is it as a movie?
It insists upon itself, Lois.
The Lion King has a phenomenally strong first act and then goes rather rapidly downhill once Timon and Pumbaa show up. Despite this, it is a very competently constructed film with some of the most impressive animation ever produced by the studio, a fantastic soundtrack from Hans Zimmer and Elton John, and some memorable characters and lines of dialogue. It's also the first film where Disney seemed to actually try to be inclusive. There are multiple voice actors of color in the cast, and quite a lot of research went into its visuals and music, giving the movie a sense of authenticity that is often lacking. And its insidious pro-monarchy message is something I will never be able to stomach. If you like this movie, I'm not gonna yuck your yum. There is definitely a lot of good stuff here. But I can't in good conscience recommend it to watch, particularly not to children. The idea of, the system is fine, it's just a few bad apples, is a poisonous one. Because if you know anything about apples, you know that a single bad one will spoil the bunch. The answer is not trying to find the one good apple. The answer is finding a system that doesn't rely on just one apple. I am, as ever, sincerely grateful to my Patreon patrons, including but not limited to Gurgi85, Jinx KB, Savannah Mighty Zebra, Tony Houst, Bewilder Eye, Jekko, Sugar Cubed Glider, Lord Christine, Andrew T, Agent Shifter, Husky Trent, Lemon Lamb Laura, Aspadites, That Gay Duck, Sugar Snap Kaylee, Pandora the Omnipresent, Gilda Gilded Dragon, The Art Gremlin, Acorn Hunter, Roxanne Gilling, Jacob Schaller, Slayer by Proxy, Cat, Brandon Farrar, Lindsay B, Woof Masubi, Dizzy Des, M. Rock, Tyler Johnson, JC Alexandre, and Lemon Candy. This content is sponsored by viewers like you. It's only $5 a month, or 10 if you want me to say your name at the end here. I've also announced some patron stretch goals, at which I will make some fun music videos. I also have a Discord server. Feel free to head on over and get chatting with other members of this growing community, if that's your jam. Either way, join me next time as we discuss how best to depict actual history with Pocahontas.